And welcome to the CNY Central Weather Authority Winter Outlook for 2024-25. I'm meteorologist Peter Hall. I'm joined by my colleagues.
Meteorologist Violet Scibior here.
Meteorologist Josh Kozlowski.
Oh, it's always so important every single year. Right about this time, the first flakes fly. We're actually really overdue to see even accumulating snow. So let's get right to the forecast. Here's a look at our winter weather outlook. We're going to start you off with snowfall. And what we like to do here at the CNY Central Weather Authority is show you a pie chart of percentages above average, near average, and below average. So we're forecasting a 30% chance of near average snowfall, a 55% chance, a better than even chance of being below average for snowfall, and a 15% chance at above average. So yes, there is an opportunity for all three, but you see where we're putting and hedging our bets. Now to temperatures. Take a look at this for the pie chart. How will temperatures be as we look ahead to the winter? We're actually forecasting a better than even chance, a 60% chance, look at all that, for above average temperatures for the winter season, a 30% chance at average, and only a 10% chance at below average numbers. We all know it's going to be cold. We all know there's going to be some snow. But for ski areas, for snow lovers, for snowmobiling, this gets to be an important part of our forecast. And we've all done a ton of research separately to come up with these numbers. But we've all individually split it up. We're going to start off with meteorologist Violet Scibior. What did you focus on to make our forecast?
Right, Peter. So, of course, you may have heard a lot of talk about La Nina. This one that we're expecting this year is a very, very weak one. We're actually going what's called ENSO neutral into La Nina. So it's not like the entire winter is actually going to be a La Nina. So I looked at years past that were very similar to what we're expecting to get this year, from neutral to a weak La Nina. And if you want the details about the numbers, La Nina goes from 0 as strong as -2, usually.
And where we're going to be this winter likely?
So we started at 0, and we're only going up to maybe -1, but usually between that -0.5 to -1 range.
And explain to us what La Nina is.
So La Nina versus El Nino, we've both heard of those. It has to do with the trade winds. So the trade winds are right at the equator. They blow from east to west. La Nina is when they're stronger. And when they're stronger, we have some colder water bubbling up in the eastern Pacific, so on the west coast of the U.S. And that can affect our jet streams and where they push our weather streams. The jet stream is basically the roadway for our weather systems and how they move across the country. So with a La Nina, even though it is a weak one, that will affect our jet streams, likely to bring some warmer and drier conditions to the Northeast. But again, it's not always a direct correlation, just because we have a lot of micro-scale type of weather events that happen here in the Northeast, so we can't base it all on La Nina.
Right, so it's important to matter. That's actually more of an I-95 corridor type of thing, the nor'easters, where you get the different amounts of snow from Boston to New York and Philadelphia, whereas here in central New York, just like Violet said, we get some cold air, you get a west-northwest wind, and all of a sudden you get snow like crazy. So what did you find?
Yeah, so looking at the seasons that we went from neutral to a weak La Nina, in general, I've actually detailed top 10 past winters that are most similar to this one. And most of them, actually 7 out of 10, were below average snowfall. So there is a trend there. But I also want to point out, and I made a little graphic here to show you the outliers. We had one season that was 170 inches, another that was 134 inches. So a couple of outliers, and that can be due to things like a huge lake effect snow event that could dump several feet and just really throw off our season snowfall total numbers.
Right, and we just mentioned we're looking at all different type of things. It's not just one factor. That's why we're all doing different parts of the research. And that's part of the reason why our pie chart does have that 10, 15% chance, a small chance that we could be above average, just like you said.
Yes.
And so was that all that you looked at?
I also looked at our average snowfall and temperatures just to determine what our averages are. And something interesting that I found is that our average season snowfall for Syracuse, if you lump in the past few years, our season snowfall total actually went down from 127 inches to 116. as our average. So looking at past winters, whether you want to base it on our old average or
nearly
our
a
new
foot
averages,
going down, right?
Yeah, it's a big difference.
Almost.
Yeah, and just for climatologically, we change the averages, not we, us at CNY Central, but in terms of climatology, every 10 years they do new numbers.
Yes.
And just as a, by the way, just those last recent years, so last year 60.8 inches, the year before 65.6, 2021-22, 76, 2020-21, 73, 2019-2020, 87.6. We've had 5 straight below 100 average, 100 inches of snowfall, and you got to go back 7 seasons for something above average. Just like you said, we've never had this since the snow was starting to be observed at the airport, right, Josh?
Aside from the last few years, I'm trying to remember when it actually was a busy winter season with snow system after snow system hitting us, you know? And I think some of the ones about 4 or 5 years ago, I remember there's a lot of mix. A lot of times where sleet and freezing rain and rain just really kind of tempered down the snowfall amount. So, but you know, we can talk about more seasons later, but just the more recent times, I don't remember the last time it was frequent snow. And wow, this is a winter, you know?
Yes, and actually one more thing to add too is I looked at liquid versus snow. Most people think of a winter forecast as in predicting snowfall. Well, I said, hey, well, maybe it may be a year with lower snowfall this upcoming winter.
But how about rain, maybe?
How about liquid?
So what'd you find?
That includes rain, any type of precipitation, including snowfall, of course, too. But liquid, I found that the past years that we went from a neutral to a weak La Nina was at average liquid. So below average snowfall, but near average liquid. So we could have a lot more weather systems that were more rain or incorporated warmer temperatures rather than snow. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to be drier. It could just be more rain than snow.
Kind of goes to what Josh just mentioned.
Right.
Mixing,
Right. And the other thing too is for anyone who doesn't know where the name El Nino / La Nina comes from, do you guys know the origin of the name?
I know it's child in Spanish.
So in Spanish, it's referred to El Nino as the Christ child or El Nino Cristo. And the peak occurrence of El Nino or La Nina is usually around Christmas time. There's the end of December. Okay, so anybody who doesn't actually know where that name from, they just pull out of a hat. It's because of the Eastern Pacific near South America, I believe, right? That area of South America offshore, it's El Nino Cristo, but they shorten it to El Nino because of the Christ child. So December 25th, around that time frame.
Well, now you can talk about that at Thanksgiving with your family.
Yes, that's not a bad idea. Oh, did you know that's one of those Trivial Pursuit type of
Makes
things?
it sound smart.
You know, and then the other thing you mentioned with the mix and having more rain, that also makes you think, okay, I'm a skier, I'm a snowmobiler. It's been tough. Even if I were to get snow and it was cold and not melting, you would have a better season, or they can make snow for ski areas, right?
Exactly.
So that whole psychology of all that's melting, it's bad for the businesses for them.
Yeah.
It's bad for the psyche that people like to enjoy winter, not to mention ice fishing. If it's warmer than average, less snow, you're probably going to have less ice thickness on Oneida Lake and such. And there's a big industry of all of those things we just mentioned.
Yes, and that's another thing too, is the ice in the lake. So because it's been so warm, even over the summer and fall months, the lake is fairly warm, and that's going to lead to early season lake effect snow events, which once again could also throw off our season snowfall totals.
That's
so
a very good point too. Yeah, a lot of different factors. In fact, Josh, what factors did you look at in terms of developing your forecast?
Yeah, so great stuff, Violet. Appreciate that, and thank you, Peter.
Of course.
There were 4 actual items I looked at with my research for my winter forecast to contribute to the group and the team here. And the first thing actually has related to what's happened most recently now. It is the tropics. What happened this past summer and fall? We had a lot of named storms. We had a lot of, unfortunately, landfalls, and specifically in the state of Florida. Now, just looking at the number of named systems out in the ocean, I was curious. We had 12 named systems, and 6 of those actually made landfall in the United States. And that alone, that statistic, of course, is certainly high.
Yeah.
But because this year, a lot of our neighbors and a lot of our colleagues we know and family may have property down in Florida, they're going to remember this summer and fall.
Oh, yeah.
And then they're going to say, okay, what happened that winter that followed the tropical season? So I wanted to find out how were prior winters turning out to be after a very active tropical season. The number of named storms being 12 or more, all the way back about 75 years, we didn't look at for our research here, 43% of the time we had below average snowfall for the following winter. 36% of the time we had an average snowfall season, and 21% of the time we had above average season. So the majority of those seasons produced below average snowfall the following winter. So that kind of falls in tune with some of the other research we found so far.
Although there is a little more on the getting more snow than we've previously had, a little more pushing towards an average or above average than our research showed.
Exactly.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, but that's a good piece of information.
So,
that's why we have to look at all these different factors.
And I think something like this, you think, okay, well, we had all the tropical activity. The temperatures of the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, have been certainly warmer.
That's true.
But does that always mean that we're going to have above average temperatures and below average snowfall? I wanted to find out. So,
okay, so what did you find?
That was that. And most of those seasons, while I didn't actually look at the specific water temperatures of those seasons, I looked at just kind of like, you know, the last few years, especially this past summer, we've had the ocean temperatures have been labeled as hot versus warm, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, especially in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Okay, we had a number of storms that reached major category status in the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic as well. So that's the number one thing. Another factor I want to talk about, guys, is something very basic. What's the biggest thing you would say that impacts what happens on planet Earth? What would you say?
Got to be something with the sun, right? Because how do we get warm or cold or whatever?
Or even the spin. I mean, the Earth is
it could be
always
the
moving,
Coriolis
so
effect,
lots of different moving parts.
Yep. Pete, you get the answer correct there. For the sun has the biggest.
Coriolis effect is important.
It does, but just the amount of think about, you know, this is the only planet in the solar system that has supposedly, you know, sustainable life like we're dealing with here because of the amount of heating we get
and just the right temperature for life to occur, right?
Right, a nice balance. So when I did my research about solar output over the past 75 years, what I looked at is when we have years of, by the way, we're in a solar maximum right now. We are in a period where we have, remember this past summer and fall, all the geomagnetic storms and the
Aurora
Borealis.
Northern Lights.
That's correct. All those times we had pictures and video and using the night mode filter on our phones.
I can't remember the last time we've had so many chances for the Northern Lights.
So all of that being considered, we have high solar output coming into the planet. Okay?
A maximum.
That's correct. And over the past 75 years, taking that information, when we have solar maximums, it actually has weak blocking in the northern Atlantic. Okay, weak blocking means like we've had the last few years with storms that's zipping across,
So maximum solar, fast-moving storms, they can't produce big nor'easters sort of thing? Is that what that means?
That's
They
correct.
can't strengthen and become
The
larger systems.
solar minimum years, if we had a solar minimum right now, that'd be helping trying to increase the blocking in the Northern Atlantic and potentially increasing the snow. So of all the factors I'm talking about today, this is the only factor that says we might actually be dealing with the less snow because of something that's outside of the planet. Something that's outside of Earth.
Not an oscillation, not a La Nina, but this is just the sun.
That's correct.
And there's no absolutes. Like we've been saying, there are some outlier years because it's all of these different factors coming together to produce our forecast. It's not just, well, one thing is it, that's it.
It is nice to see, though, that each of the things that we've looked at in general have pointed to less snow. It's nice that they are actually, you know, correlating with each other that rather than disagreeing, because then we would just be at a total loss.
That's good. It's like a push and pull. It's like a tug of war. Who's going to win out? And it seems that there's more on this side pulling it to another less than average, but probably not necessarily as severe as last season. I mean, the last 5 have been under 100, and then last year was only 60. It should be noted, by the way, when we're saying these numbers, they're for Syracuse. Probably be a good idea to just put up the map of all of upstate New York, the snowfall graphic. This is what we're showing you here is the average snowfall per season. And take a look. From the Finger Lakes, on average, anywhere from like 25 to 50 to 75 inches from southwest to northeast over the Finger Lakes. Then the immediate central New York area, as we zoom in, you'll see it's anywhere between 75 and 125 inches. And then up north, the Tug Hill Plateau, which, by the way, the last couple of seasons, well, you can see as much as 175 to 300 inches of snow. Last couple of years and seasons, there were some blockbuster events near Buffalo. We all know that, right? From Lake Effect, near Watertown, parts of Jefferson County got clobbered even when others weren't seeing it. So it doesn't
nearly 8 feet of snow.
Right.
In parts
So
of
you
Buffalo.
can exactly. So you got to watch those lakes because that could mess up localized differences versus, let's say, the the immediate central New York area. And I think it's an important thing to talk about, too.
I think it's also something to note, too, is that when we are producing this forecast, we are saying for Syracuse, for, the immediate Onondaga County. We're not saying including the Tug Hill in terms of snowfall averages. So when we're forecasting and we're saying below or above average for temperatures and snowfall and even liquid precipitation, we're talking about Syracuse itself.
In the immediate central New York area.
Yes.
Good points there.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think back real quick about the lake effect. You guys are saying how it's above average temperatures for the winter too. That is not only an early lake effect time for these any cold inputs of air, but we could have lake effect maybe going all the way through. If it was only lake effect, and the lakes have a kind of a head start on the warming and delayed being cooled off. Lake effect later in the winter versus maybe in the fall being the most robust type of lake effect. Not necessarily Syracuse. It could be a Watertown Buffalo thing.
Sure.
It could be an Oswego County thing. But yeah, the hot tub hasn't completely cooled off, we'll say.
That's a good
maybe
point.
compared to other winters.
I mean, this was the warmest year on record, not just for Syracuse, for the entire globe.
That's a good point.
I mean, so it just really goes to show. And the Great Lakes are going to make a big difference this season, I think, because of that. It really depends if the lakes freeze over or not, how that contributes to the lake effect snow amounts. Yeah.
This will probably be a good transition to North Atlantic oscillations. There are a lot of different oscillations, which kind of goes to what he was talking about, positive, negative, things are moving around. What did the NAO and your research show about that?
So the NAO very basically is basically just a measurement of, in the ocean, say, again, we're specifically looking at the Northern Atlantic Ocean. So the NAO, first off, I want to look at, just in general, prior years that had a weak NAO, kind of like what we're in right now, kind of like limbo, like it's not really positive, not really negative, or it kind of just oscillates up and down very slightly on
Near zero, basically.
Yeah, it's almost negligible, but it can kind of just go real quick, but not really do much. So in the years where there's been this situation, okay, I looked back and basically 20 seasons I looked back at during the last 75 that actually had this occur.
Okay.
They were weak or neutral. The winters that followed didn't really have a correlation to what the NAO becomes. So all the times we had neutral NAO in the fall, it didn't really go to positive all winter. It didn't really go to all negative or neutral. It was just a mix. So there really wasn't any correlation with the research I looked at there. However, asterisks, right? Despite that, of all the succeeding winters after that occurred, after the weak NAO in the fall, 65% of the winters, 65% of winters had below average snowfall.
There you go again.
20% had average snowfall, and only 15% had above average snowfall, if you guys can believe that.
Yeah, that's a really, really strong correlation, and it just only adds to everything else that we've been looking at. Explain exactly the North Atlantic Oscillation.
Yeah.
So how does that impact our weather systems here in the Northeast?
Like it's really negative or really positive?
Yes.
Sure. So the negative part is when we have basically in the, say, the ocean, we have, think of like a wave. We have a higher wave, okay? The track of storms can kind of go down like this. So if they're going across, but they have to take all this time to go up and all this time, as an example, they're slowing down, right? They're not zipping across. How many times we were forecasting the last few winters, we're like, well, this storm's gonna zip out to sea, we're not gonna get much snow out of it. I lost track of them all. Most of them did that, right?
I think everybody knows when they look at a nor'easter on a satellite picture or radar, you see it coming up the coast. And that's what he's mentioning by up and down, more going up north and south. And that's when you get a lot of bigger storms, as opposed to things going zipping across like a clipper. Outdoor clipper goes
like
fast, it doesn't have a lot of moisture. It could produce lake effect, but not big nor'easters or big storms.
So in general, we will have more often, more frequent, more periodic bouts of cold and potentially snow because of that slowing down. The system has time to kind of, get its act together and get all the dynamics in the atmosphere together and try to produce a nor'easter coastal event or lake effect. Sometimes it's both. Somebody get a coastal storm and it's like, here comes part two, here comes the lake effect. You were not done with yet. So that's the negative side of it. The positive NAO basically would be what we had kind of going on all the last few winters. The blocking is it's very, very weak. It doesn't allow the storms to have time to strengthen or develop or bombogenesis. You ever hear that phrase, bombogenesis? It's going to bomb out. Not during positive NAO periods. And in the wintertime, by the way, you guys, it's not just constant. You can have a positive NAO in December, you can have negative in January, you can have neutral. It's
just a fast change.
Yeah, and that's why when I was researching that, it didn't have a direct correlation. It's just kind of like, it can be a month-to-month type deal. Like if you're renting an apartment month-to-month, it can change, like that.
It's one of those things where it's not very forecastable into the future more than maybe a week or two, similar to other types of things that we look at. And you said there was one other factor that you looked at? What was
part 4.
Okay.
Another very simple concept. And this factor is actually kind of the reason why I think we could be maybe a slightly above where we've been, slightly above where we've been the last 5 winters, is the buildup of snow and ice in Siberia, which is what, northern Russia?
Sure.
Okay, so northern Russia, if you ever look at a globe or a map, it's basically the Siberian area there. It's very close to the North Pole. Okay, very
it's sort
close.
of like northern Canada, really. The prairies way up there, but on the other side of the globe.
Correct. Yep.
Right.
So in the months of September to October, there has been an increase in snow coverage in that area. It's building up the cold. And that's where the cold comes from that impacts our seasons, right?
And it's important to know when you have snowpack, and you actually will have colder nights, and it's kind of a feedback where, and especially when you're at the North Pole, you don't get either zero or very little sun to even melt the snow, so it's just going to feed back and get colder and snowier. So what did you find?
So I found that basically right now when we have these increasing, and a significant increase in the snow coverage, especially in Siberia, but also ice over the Arctic Ocean too, during the months, what happens is when that snow and that cold builds, it actually increases, again, the heights, the pressure, we call it, in that area, and it increases the chance for maybe seeing some of that cold come down. Now, it means that
into our area.
Into our area. Okay. So aside from anything else I just talked about, just the fact that there's this coverage of the snow and ice, I really think that's the potential there. It hasn't been like neutral, it hasn't been decreasing. The fact that it's still building is telling me, like, you know what? The last few winters we had, what, 65, 60, 70 something inches. Could we be up a little bit above that because there's this other factor? Not necessarily, but something to not ignore.
So when our weather systems pull down that colder air from up north, if it is colder up there, if it continues to build, what would be being pulled down into central New York could technically be even colder.
Even if it was just more lake effect events. So just take out coastal storms out of the equation altogether. If we didn't have the blocking, I would just say, you got a cold source, it's very close by, it's not like it's a weak cold, not like a small area, it's pretty coverage. And also one point, I believe if it's a snow coverage in winters, by now has built up below or at or below 60 degrees north latitude, that part of Siberia, that usually leads to a winter where we can have some blocking and maybe some more bouts of cold too. So
it's interesting. It's almost like a tug of war. Everybody's played tug of war once, right? Some stuff is pulling one way, the other is pulling the other way, and it's who's the stronger, or maybe it cancels each other out. And that's why we have to look at all of these different factors as they all influence the weather as we look forward. And I've also looked at some information too. That's all of your information, right, guys? Did you get?
I just have one more thing to add on this too, is that we're talking about the movement of weather systems. Throughout the entire winter, we can see storm systems from October all the way through March, usually.
And May sometimes.
Exactly. And so our roadway for our weather systems is not always going to stay the same. Even if we looked at all of these factors, sometimes we can have what's called a zonal flow or a meridional flow. Zonal, our systems can move from west to east.
Which is what Josh was just talking about,
Yeah, it all depends on, really week to week, what our weather system setup looks like across the country. So it's not always going to be that same roadway just stuck in place across the country.
That's a good, there can be some changes from time to time. I also looked at some other information. I did look at some of the La Nina years as well, but I also looked at there are actually seasonal forecasts. There's something called a C3S seasonal forecast. What it does is it takes a bunch of different, like we're the National Weather Service, NOAA, that's the United States. There's also the European, there's a UK Meteorological Order, United Kingdom, French, there's the German Weather Service, there's a Euro-Mediterranean Center, even Canadian Environment Canada has a seasonal weather outlook. And if you look at some of the graphics here, you'll note that their forecasts from December through February, look at that red. In fact, we're going to zoom in. You see the green at the top. That's above average for Canada, by the way, below average for much of the country, especially here in the Northeast. And of course, March, we all know March can be a blockbuster. Blizzard in 93, okay, that was we've had big time storms in March. Even March's, if you look at March's graphic, also in the red, they are predicting below average snow for all of these months. And as we take a look at temperatures, now this wasn't all of those, this was the European and the UK Met. You can see actually on the right, if you bring up that graphic with the seasonable temperatures, you look at the right, you'll see above and below. As we zoom across, you'll see a very similar thing here. Zoom into the Northeast, they're actually forecasting 3 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit above average for the entire winter season. I believe it's December through February, whatever. I think that's the technical winter 3-month season.
Yeah.
Those two models, and remember, computer models are just models. They're not going to be perfect. But the trend of all of what we're looking at seems to be pointing to a better chance of below average snow and above average temperatures. But like we've all just said, there are some outlier years, which is why we can't go 0% on the pie chart. Well, let's bring up the pie charts again, because this would be a good time just to reiterate all the information we just said, all the percentages, right? So I remember us all saying a very similar kind of above, not every single factor, but it seems like we're pretty close to where we should be biasing our forecast with a better chance of above average temperatures, with a percentage that's higher in the average than below average. But we can't completely rule out and say 0 for that. And then, like we've mentioned with the snowfall, there are some years that are above average. There's not a 0 chance we get above average. Well, there you have it. A lot of information. Appreciate all the research done here, because there's so much that goes into a seasonal forecast. Whatever does happen, we're going to be here for you. I'm meteorologist Peter Hall.
Violet Scibior.
Josh Kozlowski.
The entire weather team for CNY Central has you covered on NBC3, CBS 5, CW6, CNYCentral.com, on social media. So when impactful systems, whether it's really cold, snowy, rainy, flood, all those weather factors, we're here to keep you safe and out ahead of the storm. I hope you have a great winter season and have a great day.